Hello, and welcome to the Yale SOM Exchange webinar, After Row, the Role of Business in Access to Reproductive Healthcare. Yale SOM is the School of Management series, Yale SOM Exchange, that is the School of Management series of online conversations. This series provides alumni and the entire Yale SOM community with opportunities to keep learning about faculty research, current events, and career strategies. I am Meshie. I am a current student and member of the MBA for Executives class of 2023 and a program officer at the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. Today, I'm also joined by an esteemed panel. I'm going to briefly introduce them, and you can find their bios at the link in the chat or where you registered for this webinar. I'm joined by Natalie Adsuar, class of 2010, an OBGYN at Cleveland Clinic. I am also joined by Lisa, class of 91, Lisa Allen. And Lisa is a senior vice president. During the day, her role is HR and talent management at Sharp Healthcare. I'm also joined by Heidi Brooks, senior lecturer in organizational behavior at Yale SOM. And I'm joined by Amanda Skinner, class of 2008, president and chief executive officer at Planned Parenthood of Southern New England. As we get into the conversation today, I want to even the playing field on a few things. First is acknowledging shorthand language. You will undoubtedly hear in today's conversation, namely the Dobbs decision and/or the overturn of Roe v. Wade. Many of you already know that these terms refer to the decision taken this summer by the Supreme Court of the United States, affirming that abortion is illegal and effectively overturning the underlying federal right protecting abortions as part of a broader landscape of sexual and reproductive rights. Second is an awareness that behind all of the legal and policy talk are real people who are incredibly impacted. Our sisters, our neighbors, our children, our families, you and me. Whatever your ideology, I hope today's conversation can help us each see a role for ourselves to act in our power to ensure the Dobbs decision does not widen existing disparities, including along gender, wealth, and racial lines. Third, in engaging the breadth of disproportionate impact, we may briefly discuss those who are both clinically and criminally vulnerable, including healthcare providers. We're not experts in the law, and the legal framework is not the lens through which we will have today's conversation. Rather, we are keenly interested in exploring multiple perspectives, social, economical, cultural implications for leaders, for business, for society. Lastly, we are keenly aware of the optics of today's panel as well. I don't only want to observe it, but I want to use it as a call to action for all of us, especially the men who are listening today. It is not lost on us that men still dominate the most influential companies in the world. And though this conversation can sometimes be reduced to people with the capacity for pregnancy, you will soon see that the seismic impact of Dobbs' decision makes comprehensive reproductive health care of significant importance for all of us. I want to offer a disclaimer that these are the personal opinions of our panelists as women, alumni, and their varied experiences and perspectives will be brought to the table. But their perspectives do not necessarily reflect the views of their employers unless they say so. Okay, now let's jump into our questions and answers for this time. I'm going to pose a question to all of the panelists, and I'll ask for your response in alphabetical order. So Lisa, Natalie, Heidi, and then Amanda. The Dobbs decision overturned a linchpin in sexual and reproductive health care for people with the capacity for pregnancy, but it did so much more, and we will get to that. But first, I want to understand what brought you to this conversation today.
Good morning. So appreciate the opportunity to be with you this morning. For me, I think reflecting back, it's been quite some time. I'm class of 91 since I've been in a formal academic setting. And you don't quite get the same opportunity to talk about things the way you do when you're fully in an academic program and getting a chance to really dig deep and answer really tough questions. And for me, this is really an opportunity to reflect on things that I want to understand better from those that you've invited to the panel, and to contribute a little bit of thought leadership from the perspective of a person who's been in and out of multiple industries, but in healthcare, certainly for the last 20 plus years, and a woman who's passionate about women having an opportunity to live out their best lives, right? And doing that really means supporting each other and putting dialogue out that helps people understand how important things, any sort of choice is, to not be denied choice, right? So that's why I'm here today. Thank you.
So hi, I'm excited to be here in the company of such esteemed friends and a mentor and colleagues. And so thank you so much for having us and putting this together, Meshie. I think as a physician in women's healthcare practicing in Ohio, I've seen from day one the impact of this decision. So I'm just motivated to share this perspective with our group today. I'm hoping as towards the end of our discussion that a couple of things will come across in our dialogue. Firstly, that abortion care is reproductive care, that reproductive care is healthcare, right? And to put a face to this issue, that 1 in 4 women are going to have an abortion, and that's why this is so important to talk about. And then to kind of think of it in the scope of public health and a public health emergency and the far-reaching repercussions that this already having. So I'm excited to bring a clinician perspective to the dialogue and having a platform to engage in it with the rest of my colleagues. So again, thank you so much for having me.
Inviting Heidi and then Amanda to jump in.
Thanks, Meshie. Well, I'm here because I care about Yale School of Management's mission for educating leaders for business and society. And for me, one of the things that we can best do is talk about our context of what's happening in our society and what business leaders can do in response to those issues, actively taking a stance when it impacts their people, and actively taking a stance when they don't necessarily understand how it impacts their people and their community and their society. It's a time of great ambiguity. I'm at the beginning of my 20th year of teaching at Yale School of Management, and I continue to care very much about the mission. It's a time of great ambiguity, which means it's a very important time for leadership. Not only leadership on the things that we understand, but we need leadership even more when we don't actually understand necessarily what to do when there's ambiguity. And so here is a tremendous opportunity for me to talk with current students and alums about something that matters. It's an opportunity for us to, or for at least for me, to take a stand for what I talk about all the time, which is let's talk to each other about what impacts us, not necessarily in divisive ways, but in ways where we can actually get wiser over time, still want to work together and have real conversation. And very personally, I know people on the panel, and Meshie and I have been hanging out for a while on issues of health and equity, and gosh, how can I say no to that? I want to be in this conversation. Thanks for having me.
Two quick things. First, one is to say thank you for this opportunity. And it's so nice to be on this panel and to see folks that I have interacted with before, people I consider either friends or inspirations, or both, and also to get to be with some new people. Meshie, I might have misheard you. But if I misheard you, others might have misheard you. And I do just want to make sure one thing is clear to people, that the Dobbs decision did not make abortion illegal. It removed the federal protection for abortion. And in removing the federal protection, made it a states' rights issue. So it's an important distinction, because I do see a lot of fear happening right now with people not fully understanding what happened. So I just want to offer that clarity. I might have misheard you, but I just wanted to touch on that quickly. So why am I here? I'm here because I believe that for people who can become pregnant, that the right to control your own reproductive life and your fertility and your body is fundamental to having actual freedom and agency in your life, and to being able to create the life that you want to create. I'm here because of my professional, choices. I work at Planned Parenthood, obviously. I'm here because I come from a long line of women who didn't have choices in their life, who had important choices taken away from them, who didn't get to make decisions about their own life, and whose lives were significantly impacted by that lack of ability to make decisions or choices, whether it was about the number of children they had or who they married. My great-great-grandmother was kidnapped and forced into a marriage against her will. And I'm here because I had an abortion at 39 years old, and I didn't want to be. I was pregnant. I did not want to be. I was married then to the love of my life, who I am still married to. We did not want to be parents. And because I believe that choice at that time has been a critical part of why I have been able to continue to have the career and life that I wanted to have. I am always trying to do my part to also talk more about abortion. As Natalie said, abortion is healthcare, and we need to talk more about it to destigmatize it and take away the shame.
Thank you all, and thank you, Amanda, for stepping into your leadership in quite the way that you have in starting that process of destigmatizing. Natalie, I want to call you back into the conversation and ask you, you have the distinction of having both an MBA degree and a medical degree, and this affords you proximity to the real life effects of inadequate access to reproductive health care, as well as a strong locus of analysis for the business case. Why would you say should businesses get activated around comprehensive reproductive health care, and why now?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple main areas that will impact businesses and why this is important, right? I think a low-hanging fruit, an easy one, is the financial implications, right? Recent studies show that abortion restrictions cost every state over $100 billion a year, right? So financially, we know that restricting women's reproductive health care is going to have major impact. Another big part is that over the past few years, businesses have taken on a significant role and a voice towards driving societal change. Our business leaders have been granted this privileged position of power, and they have a responsibility to use that platform. And we've seen this in key role. They've had a key role in recent issues like racial and gender inequality and climate change and voting rights, and now reproductive health care. In this age of political mistrust, Americans still have faith in their employers, still believe in them, and it's a responsibility that can't be taken lightly. They're saying, to not say anything is actually a choice, right? To not silence is a communication of perspective and position, and businesses need to make sure that that is the position that they want to have. I think finally, thankfully, in the context of diversity, equity, and inclusion, we just can't ignore females and their need in the workforce. And thankfully, this dialogue has been started, but this is a key time in that dialogue. And women without access to abortion care are 3 times more likely to leave the workforce. And as companies are struggling to attract and retain workers due to affordable childcare, now being forced or having restrictions to their choice of how many children have or when to have children is only going to exacerbate this. I think you have to think of the pay gap that now childbearing and the years of raising is going to be exacerbated with. And as the talent market becomes more competitive, I think recruitment and retention is going to circle a little bit more around what women need, right? What keeps women in the workforce, whether it's flexible hours, whether it's fair maternity leave and compensation, how to come back to the workforce after children, and again, reproductive and abortion care. And then finally, this is about building a fair and inclusive workforce. Leaders have to care. There has to be a desire and a passion about creating a culture, a workplace culture that's key, where pregnancy and reproductive health is normalized and that stigma around it is eliminated.
Thank you, Natalie. And I'm going to call in Amanda and Lisa to reflect with me on this and perhaps take this a layer deeper in terms of some of the externalities that Natalie named. In a 2020 study that found on average that white women still made 73 cents on the dollar compared to their male counterparts. Black and Hispanic women made 58 cents and 40 cents respectively. This was before women left the workforce in droves due to remote schooling and a whole host of caregiving challenges. It is estimated that about 200 million fewer women are in the workforce than there were 2 years ago. From your perspectives, Amanda, as an employer and advocate, and Lisa, from your circles in human resources and your personal experiences, help us make sense of these statistics. Who is at risk for the disproportionate threat that inadequate access to comprehensive healthcare has?
Well, I can start, I guess, just because you said, I think, my name first. So a couple of things. First, just to build on sort of the economic case, the International Women's Policy Center estimated that the restrictions in place on abortion in 2020, which was before the Dobbs decision, cost state economies an estimated $105 billion per year, and that if we got rid of all state level restrictions on abortion, that would increase our national GDP by nearly 5%. And it is because of the things that Natalie named, right? That we see reductions in labor force participation and in earning levels because they're caring for children. And of course, we know that that's much worse, and that increasing abortion restrictions will only harm those devastating economic outcomes. I think we also know that when we look at those economic outcomes and who is most harmed by abortion bans, it is communities of color, it's Black women, it's people who already struggle to access comprehensive healthcare, whether it's because they live in rural communities or they live in poverty. So the people who are already sort of struggling the most are the people who are going to experience the most harm. People of resources, people who have economic means, those folks are going to be able to get themselves a plane ticket wherever they need to go. So when we look at the workforce implications, we have to just acknowledge very openly that those implications are going to be most harmful and most significant on the people who are really sort of like the frontline workers of these organizations, the people who actually make everything go, because those are typically the lower paid workforce. We certainly haven't addressed every possible issue as an employer. We are working every day at Planned Parenthood of Southern New England, a nonprofit organization where, let's be honest, it's not like we have a cancer tower or an orthopedic tower to offset a very challenging business model. But we're working every day to do what we can to make our workplace a workplace that supports families and supports our staff. And that includes, we cover full access, of course, to sexual and reproductive health care. We are perpetually looking at our health benefits to make sure that they're inclusive of all of our staff. For example, making sure that our health insurance benefit is not excluding LGBTQ staff from being able to access reproductive assistance or infertility therapy by a definition of infertility that is dependent on an assumption that people are in a heterosexual couple, because that definition mandates that people have to have been trying to conceive for a period of time, which of course is not possible if you are in a same-sex couple. You can't actually meet that definition, right? So we need to make sure that our policies are really broadly inclusive of all people across the board for sexual and reproductive health care. We need to make sure that we're supporting, paid family leave. It's actually one of the reasons that an organization like mine, where when we do our advocacy work, we try to look beyond our core issues. We do not simply advocate exclusively around sexual and reproductive health and rights. We engage in things like the fight to raise the minimum wage or the fight for paid family leave. Why do we do that? We do that because those things are relevant to the lived experience of our staff, and they're relevant to the lived experience of the communities that we serve in our organization. If we want them to be able to have, again, a world that they can live in where they have the freedom to create their families and raise them in safe and supportive communities.
I guess, Amanda, I'll just add to that. I think we underestimate the impact. When you start to talk about equity in a moment, right? Like today, we talk about the inequities that exist. And some of those inequities exist because of the differences in multi-generational wealth, right? So some people come in with advantage relative to not having to have student loans, or having someone help you see the value and the benefit of investing in things that don't deliver on something in the moment, right? Your education and experiences, job experiences that may not be the most highly paid, but the best to prepare you. And having the network that surrounds you to help you make good decisions for yourself. And then let's not even get into, the issues that persist today in communities across this country, where if you have the wrong name or the wrong address, you won't get through the pools, right? To the diverse interview pools still exist today, and still battling against that. So when you look at sort of those differences and how generational wealth shows up, and then, we in this conversation, and likely anyone listening, whether you've had multi-generational wealth or not, we're already at an advantage. So in the roles that I've had in my career, you start to look at and realize that a third or more of any given workforce for the larger organizations I've been in are living on the edge. I'm not necessarily sitting here advocating for minimum wage specifically, but to understand how to manage an organization where people are making in the millions and people are barely making minimum wage. And many of those are in communities where the cost of living, just like me right now on the West Coast, 44% above the average, but wages are only 3% above the national average. And the impact of that. So it really goes to really thinking about, how do we support each other? And my personal feeling is, as an employer, how do we make the playing field level, right? How do we make information available? So one of the things that's happening is there's sort of an increase in transparency of pay information. That's wonderful. So you don't start from a disadvantage of wondering, what does this pay? And for women who continue, as you described, and for minorities, double whammy here, to make, less than their counterparts. I mean, most recently I had to sort of coach my daughter on how to advocate for herself, because no one's really working with us and encouraging us to advocate for ourselves, to require as much or more as those who we're coming in to be peers with. And it's a huge challenge. And, I am that as well. I've had my moments where I've accepted a job and I'm like, why did I take it? Why didn't I ask for more of this or more of that? So for this group who's listening, that is a real issue, and create a network for yourself. Prepare yourself. Look at the data. Understand what to ask for and what you should command in terms of your pay, but also be an advocate for others in understanding what it means when, if, it's very common in healthcare, for example, if we have to cancel a shift for you and you've already paid for your daycare, or you don't have an option to opt out, you're now in the red for the week, right? So how are we constructing the opportunity for people to work and be a part of a community and organizations that's geographically supportive? Because when we sort of create these multi-community international organizations, and we're sort of making decisions at this top layer about things that affect people. We're forgetting about oftentimes that third of our organizations who are barely making ends meet. We want to make sure we don't have employees that go homeless. I mean, can you imagine? Working homeless. It's not okay. And so in my work, I really do look for opportunities to both coach women at leadership levels, but also men, and expect those folks to be advocates for everyone across the organization in addition to themselves. Because the lack of multi-generational wealth is what is really hard to understand and to see why people struggle with certain basic decisions, to need choice the way we're talking about today, right? To need support for the kind of benefits and resources as an employer that you can offer as a safety net for people to remain working. So.
Thank you both for that. I just want to underscore this understanding that the economic impact here of not having the opportunity to space or to time your decisions around reproductive health does largely have ramifications and impacts that go well into the future, and in some cases determines whether or not families are brought out of generational poverty. So I appreciate you underscoring all of that. Heidi, I want to get you into the conversation at this juncture as well. And increasingly, we see that stakeholders expect more of businesses in addressing these large, complex social, economical, geopolitical challenges. Access to comprehensive healthcare cuts across multiple dimensions. So what considerations should business leaders be making now in light of rising expectations about their role in society and their demonstration of leadership for this time?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a really important conversation and question, certainly for alums of this school, where there's been an intentional connection between business and society and looking at impact on what some people think about as both sides. But not all business leaders have had the chance for that kind of consideration. So alums, I think, consider this as an important time for your voice, your preparation, for having thought about the connection between business and society. Business has impact outside of the bottom line. You are not just impacting, it's like talking about side effects of some drug. The drug is doing more things than what the intention is. The same is true for business and organizations. And so can we be accountable and maybe curious about our impact and the impact, of course, of society on the business, because it's not one directional, it's bi-directional. And so our ability and willingness to think about those issues and those impacts is really at the fore here. And so you don't necessarily have to know what to do, but be willing to be curious and to ask the questions and have the conversation. I think a really important thread that's clear in this conversation is, what is the impact of this issue on our workforce? Just getting curious about what does that mean for our people, for our organizational community, and our ability to have people come to work, be committed to work, both because of direct impacts of what's happening with their bodies, but also about their kind of willingness to engage in an organization and a workforce that kind of takes a position that feels uncomfortable to them, and that can happen in one way or the other. And so, I've heard a lot of people talk about directly with me and otherwise, this is an issue where our business is not about this issue. We're not going to comment. And so I'll go back to Natalie's earlier comment that silence is not the same thing as neutrality. So be careful about conflating those two. Silence will probably make its own statement, and it may not be aligned with your intention for that statement. And so the kind of default polite corporate culture of kind of keep things silent, keep things polite, may not be rigorous enough for the power and the intensity of people's feelings and experiences around this. We need to go beyond polite into being able to handle some of the deeper issues that go beyond the surface of our usual, for business as usual conversation. We can handle it. We just need to build the skills and curiosity and sense of connection to the issues and to each other to be able to handle the moment.
Handling the moment. Natalie, I'm going to come back to you on that note, because I said at the top that this is also about people. And so wanting to recognize that in this time, we're dealing with multiple different issues, and maternal mortality is an issue that comes into play here. Thinking about care delivery and delay in care is an issue that comes in here. Thinking about the workforce and the future of the workforce and what it means to have joy in work and joy at practicing the thing that you dedicated so much of your life in getting prepared for. So I just want to invite your reflection from that perspective.
So I was so deeply listening, I forgot to unmute myself. I think it's important to know that this is not a siloed, one-issued conversation, right? As you mentioned, I went into OBGYN to take care of women. And as I tell my patients, we are in the business of empowering women and keeping them and their pregnancies safe. But they have a choice, right? And I think when we talk through this, we have to recognize that there's maternal health, there's fetal complications and fetal consequences. And finally, and equally important, that's social developmental consequences, right? We know that there's situations, for example, if you have a child, if you have pregnancies too close to each other, where pregnancy can be a challenge to maternal health, medical conditions that would be a challenge if the mother's to be pregnant. Childhood pregnancies, right? We recognize that an 11-year-old girl may not be in a position, or probably is not in a position, to welcome a pregnancy. There's fetal complications and fetal consequences to continue a pregnancy unwanted. And again, like I said earlier, finally, and just as important, are the social and developmental consequences of forcing a pregnancy to continue. We know that women that find themselves deprived of choice, they have their educational aspirations end up being affected, their employment aspirations, that's what we just talked about. And that lack of access is a barrier to their personal growth and financial stability. Like I said, tell my patients, I don't take care of an issue, I take care of a person. And that's just as important as any medical consequences we have. So it just, I think the last thing I would say about the issue is, what does this open the door for? And as Heidi said at some point, this is an opportunity for dialogue. What other healthcare limitations are we going to impose to women and future generations? What does this look like, not just in this moment, but long term? And how do we engage in a conversation so that we control the impact of this outcome? How do we sit down and talk about this?
Yes, I see your hand, Amanda, and I was coming right to you. So why don't you jump on in and I can follow up with my question.
Well, I can't help but want to jump into this part of the conversation just a little bit, because while it's not what I do for a profession anymore, I did spend 10 years of my life as a midwife and as also a frontline healthcare provider here in Connecticut. And just to comment on what are the public health impacts of this? What are the healthcare impacts of it? We don't know yet, and the legal landscape is very chaotic right now, so we won't know for some time. But University of Colorado Boulder actually did an analysis, and what they estimated was that if abortion were banned nationwide, there would be a projected 33% increase in Black maternal mortality in the United States. Now, right now, the Black maternal mortality rates are 3 to 4 times the maternal mortality rates of white women in the United States. So that would be, it's already terrible. we as a country, we already have like really just alarmingly bad maternal mortality and morbidity outcomes for a developed country, and then it would be so much worse. And I think again that goes, it goes back to the point that when we look at who is harmed by these bans, it is people who face a variety of intersecting issues of identity that are disadvantageous, like poverty and women of color who, there are incredible studies on this that basically are like, women of color have worse outcomes because of the experience of systemic racism in the United States, like period. Like it's provider bias, there's all these things, but like literally the stress of existing in the United States contributes to these outcomes. So I guess I just want to like underscore in every way that I can there are, I know we're here to really talk about sort of the business implications. So this may not feel as relevant to somebody who just wants to be talking about the business implications of this, but there are real human consequences every single day.
Yeah, Amanda, I would just have to agree with that. And I just go back to as one of those folks who's both witnessed a loss of friends, right? And that's plural, from the failing of the healthcare system, regardless of means, right? One of the most brilliant people I knew went into the ER over the course of 3 days, complaining of pain and problems. And as they treated her as if, oh, you must have an STD. Oh, let's just treat the symptoms, send you back out. Treat the symptoms, send you back out. And I lost a colleague because no one ever took the time to run the test to verify everything they were doing was killing her. It's real. And it doesn't have to be that I'm hear you. It's worse for folks at the cross section of poverty and multiple identities that lead to sort of discrimination in the world and everything. But, when you experience it firsthand, just to see how easy it is to be failed by the healthcare system. I don't want to just sound like, I'm angry or frustrated, but to me, this decision is another way to muffle voice, to muffle choice. And I just worry that if we become complacent with our choice and our voices being muffled, what does that mean for us and our families, our daughters, our sons, our future generations? When we can talk about all the different things that have happened politically and from, the private, sector figuring out how to make reproductive health support available and to bring that into healthcare setting, and then start as an employer to say, oh, it's a competitive advantage to offer family forming benefits that are, equitable regardless of heterosexual, homosexual, other whatever kind of place you come to from a perspective of a family. We fought for years over this notion of civil unions and marriages and have sort of come through that. And yet we're moving backwards in choice and voice for women. And I don't think it's just a women's issue. I think it's an issue for this entire country. And I guess, as an employer, health advocacy is advocacy for everyone, right? That's the one thing we all have in common, is the ability to be on this earth and be healthy. So health advocacy, as an employer, I want to make sure people are voting. We're going to promote being an active citizen in your community. And the relevance of that as a healthcare professional, and whatever choices you make to support or not support things, at least you're having a voice. So I think that, there is an expectation increasingly, and, I've had the, benefit, challenge, whatever you want to call it, most of my career being in organizations that were willing to be more active. Maybe it's possibly what I've chosen, obviously. But I don't think as employers, we can make sense of how we show up for community, how we show up for shareholders, how we show up for all those constituencies and stakeholders we serve and consumers, et cetera, and ignore these issues as if they're somebody else's problem, because the workforce are the citizens of this country. And, you know, that relationship as employer, there's an expectation that we support that safety net for our workforce to be able to do their best when they're at work, right? And not be stressed out or struggling with the basic necessities of access to the right healthcare services and access to resources to help them stay working.
Great. I'm going to pick up on a point that you just made, Lisa, because I think this is, in fact, about the long game strategy, right? And you mentioned voting. And so I want to pose the question in terms of why voting matters to issues like this, and invite anyone who wants to jump in to jump in. And also, I want to let the audience know that please put your questions in via the Q&A, and we will be getting to those as well.
Well, I obviously have something to say about one of the matters. So, you know, I think we are in an interesting time where we have seen one of the most clear and profound and impactful outcomes about why voting matters. I think it's easy for people to think that's politics. I don't need to get into that. You know, that doesn't impact my day-to-day life. But for the first time in history, the United States Supreme Court overturned a right that they had previously granted as a federal right. And that is the natural consequence of a decades-long strategy through an electoral strategy. I am speaking now as a human being, by the way, not as the CEO of a C3 organization. But it is the consequence of a decades-long electoral strategy in who is elected, who has the power to define who is in the courts, and then who is sitting on the Supreme Court. So whatever your perspective is, this is a very clear example of the impact of voting, and it starts with local elections because that is how this long game is played. You know, as you know, obviously I have a particular point of view on this particular issue. And in my mind, what I visualize having happened over the last 40 plus years, nearly 50 years, is nibbling around the edges of the cookie until the entire cookie had been eaten. It was sort of a slow erosion where people got on school boards and town councils and then elected to local office and then elected to state office and then elected to national office, so that the US Congress is made up of people that would advance nominees to the Supreme Court, so that they would affirm judges that would support a very particular positional point of view. And that's where we are. So, you know, whether you share my perspective or you don't, this is still a clear example of the impact of a robust electoral strategy.
Thank you, Amanda. Heidi, I'm going to ask you to jump in again here too, because part of what Amanda just raised is the critical importance of power. And so unpacking power as part of purpose-driven leadership, especially at the intersection of these issues that are so complex and so ambiguous and so divisive. What does that mean we have to be grappling with as leaders? Like how do we show up in our full power? And what does that mean to some of the issues that we're facing now?
Yeah, it's great. I mean, some of this language of showing up in our full power, like what you just used, people have been, suggesting the word courage, and also this orientation towards purpose-driven leadership. So all of those sound great. I'm not sure that that's what I'm seeing demonstrated. If we look at kind of the other side, if we're not seeing those three things, if we're not seeing, kind of power in the spirit of kind of fairness, just from the last kind of conversation, in the spirit of kind of mutuality, we're seeing power over. If we're not seeing leadership that inspires courage, we might be seeing leadership that inspires fear. If we're not seeing purpose-driven, values-based leadership, we might be seeing interest-driven, self-interest-driven leadership. And it's not that these things are kind of so mutually exclusive and impossible to work together. It's not that, there's no fear and there's no such thing as power over and there's no such thing as having self-interest, but we tend to be pretty binary. And so we wind up thinking like, if I have to be self-interest or I can't kind of get mine. So when the conversation gets framed in binary terms, either our side gets its way or their side gets its way, it's divisive. Rather than, I would consider a more spacious, courageous, mutual use of power that's actually for the good of all, that frames the issues as a little less binary, a little bit less zero sum, a little less divisive, a little bit less us and them, and a little bit more, can we be mature and curious enough to navigate the challenges of our times? These are not things that a winning and versus losing attitude is necessarily going to solve all of the issues within the organizational context. I understand in the political context, we often have a voting kind of dynamic, but to the extent that I'm speaking to organizations and managing organizations, leading organizations from within and with external stakeholders in mind, a kind of binary zero sum, let's win the issue is not necessarily going to serve your leadership. And so having a more spacious orientation on how can we navigate the complexities that are in front of us suits many issues more so than how can we win this? How can we control the outcome? All right. How can we instead listen to what's actually happening in the context, scan, see if we can create a future that we actually want to be part of and where people actually want to work for you and your organization.
Yes, creating a future that we want to be a part of. I see your hand, Natalie, and so I'm going to ask you to jump in, and I'm encouraging folks to continue to put your questions in the chat, and I'll get to them. Jump on in, Natalie.
I just had a very short comment and drawing a parallel to Heidi's comments. As a Latina woman, I see in my community, right, this broader definition of a community, right? A very Catholic dominated community, but at the same time recognizing that as a minority and many women of color, there are going to be significantly more implications to this part of the society as far as restricting healthcare. So to Heidi's point, this opportunity to find a common ground, a broader definition, a more welcoming and open dialogue to this, to be able to embrace this, because I live it within the Hispanic community, to be able to have a space for all these, not just women, families, and with divergent points of views, but that recognizing at the same time to be able to honor this right, to honor this choice, to honor this protection, and recognize how it will impact our community within our religious preferences and the like. So I just wanted to echo Heidi's point of view that this is beyond just the workforce. This is at a cultural, personal, community level where this dialogue needs to happen.
Yes. Also underscoring part of what Heidi says in terms of this binary and what you just also lifted up, Natalie. There's this tendency to think about, as a for-profit business, I function this way. As a nonprofit business, you function this way, and so on and so forth. And so, Amanda, I imagine folks in the audience who are employers might be thinking, my organization is strategically, functionally, operationally, philosophically, etc., different from a Planned Parenthood. But what are the entry points for businesses of all kinds to get in the arena? Like, is there a spectrum on which businesses can engage around this conversation, use the tools that are available to them?
You know, I'll take a stab at that. I think that it will be different for each organization to decide how they stake their claim, right? I think that gone are the days when workforce talent people go to an organization and are sort of numb or think it's a different question about who I work for than what I care about, right? I think that people have connected who I work for and what I care about. And that is where if you're an organization that's going to be sensitive, connected, active in attracting and retaining talent, you have to be able to be clear about what you care about, what's important to you as an organization. And that is usually identified based on, the values of leadership, right? Sometimes that has origins in an organization that's, many years old, right? But we still review those things and look at those things on a constant basis because the context we're in is ever changing. And so you might not get every organization who's going to go about it the exact same way, whether it's encouraging and promoting voting, whether it's being thoughtful about creating equitable family forming benefits, whether it's being more active in providing support and resources so that if you're in a state where you can't exercise your choice, you can still be supported and getting it at a place where you can. I mean, there are so many different ways on the continuum that we can be active in supporting our workforce and supporting our communities. And I appreciate, in some respects, the generations that are in the workforce anew and coming to the workforce anew, requiring that again. Because I think that for a while, leaders got comfortable with this notion, well, this is work and that's home and the two are separate and it's uncomfortable when they intersect and how do I talk about this to people? But we're no longer, post-industrial revolution, sitting here in factories making things happen. That most of that work has moved away. And then we're service, we're knowledge worker. You're asking someone to bring their whole self to their work. And if you're asking someone to bring their whole self to their work, then you better darn be prepared to interact with them in a way and to support them in a way and to support community in a way that you make it possible for them and their next generation to be successful. And I think that is the real magic and opportunity of leadership, particularly in large organizations. A lot of people are opting out. I'm going to be an entrepreneur. Good for you. But if you work in a large organization, if you're going to ignore 20, 30% of your population because it's inconvenient, you're going to have an issue with hard to fill roles. You're going to have an issue with talent gaps in your organization that you can't find without paying exorbitant amounts to fill at a given time and poach from other employers. We see that right now in healthcare. There's a nursing shortage. We have a, strike in Minnesota, the biggest one ever. So those of us in geographically specific communities are poaching each other's talent. That doesn't work. You got to grow your own. You got to level the playing field for people to come in and be able to afford to get the education and the support they need to get to the next levels. And if we're not doing that in healthcare, shame on us. It takes a lot of education, a lot of training to be in healthcare. And that's expensive. People want greater access. People want affordable healthcare. And some of those things don't always, connect easily. And those are the challenges of leadership, is to make those hard decisions and to figure out how to grow the business model, yet support a workforce and grow talent to make it all possible. And that's what I love to do. That's why I do this work.
I want to lift up one of the questions in chat and invite anyone who wants to jump in to answer this one. And it says, I'm interested in what the panelists feel most hopeful about moving forward from this place. To Heidi's point, earlier point, if we frame change only in terms of fear, we end up in a binary mindset. What are the opportunities hidden in this moment?
I love that question. I mean, this if leadership is about being able to help us through now into the future in some very broad fashion, this is a moment that matters. And I think it's a moment and it's a movement. Lisa's last words around what's really the movement that is afoot. Our understanding of work is changing drastically. The future of work is actually very different than our kind of post-industrial kind of mindset about what work is and what it's for and why people show up. And the contract is actually quite different. I'm actually very hopeful about a future of work where we actually can see people more, where we actually have more respect for humanity at work, where we have mutuality around, what Lisa is calling this kind of bring your full self to work, to a place that can handle the full self and can respect the humanity of the workers, including the executive workers. Executives are people too. And so I'm tremendously hopeful about a future of work. These kind of issues, like what we're talking about here, seem divisive when we come from a place of fear, seem tremendously optimistic to me when we come from a place of, are we big enough to handle this moment? Are we big enough to handle this movement? Are we big enough to handle ourselves?
Meshie, I guess what I was saying is just like any relationship, right? Being able to overcome or get through a tough time makes you stronger. I think this is the opportunity that this poses. I may not change my point of view necessarily personally, but I think if we're able to overcome our challenges that these kind of very difficult situations bring up, and we can value our positions. I mean, I may not be able, my experience is my experience, but so is yours. So I think like any other relationship, if our challenges can make us stronger. And I think if we listen more than we talk, we might be able to create a groundwork to make us stronger. And I think we've gotten to the point of the issue that there is an opportunity to do more listening. I think there is actually much more conversation versus before we weren't even talking about it. There was just assumptions of what was going to happen.
Yeah. Amanda, I'm going to give you the last word and wrap us up here.
Great. So one of my very favorite, very short poems is from Rumi, and it goes like this. It says, "Barns burnt down, now I can see the moon." And I don't know what Rumi meant in the 17th century, but I know what I read in that, or what I hear in that is, this big disruptive thing has happened, and now I can see this like beautiful glowing moon on the other side. So it's like this big disruptive thing happened, and here's the opportunity on the other side. So many people have sort of touched on a variety of versions of this. One of the things that we invest a lot in, and that I think a lot about, is building capacity to work across difference. And so I think one of the opportunities here, sort of thinking about this from the employer perspective, is to think about how do we build more capacity in our workforce to work effectively across difference. If we are, endeavoring to create workforces that are the, sort of the workforce of the future and workplaces of the future, and where people are interested in a reflection of their values in their work and in their workplace. So I think that's, an opportunity as for employers to be thinking about, is that in these moments where it feels like there might be something difficult to talk about, and to Heidi's point and to Natalie's point, silence is not neutrality, actually. That maybe that's an opportunity to think about in our efforts to create more welcoming and inclusive workplaces. How do we build the skill set of our workforce around working effectively across difference so that we can really have these conversations? And then, what the other opportunity I hope specifically coming from this very particular issue is for people to talk more about their experiences with sexual and reproductive health care and with abortion. Natalie mentioned earlier, 1 in 4 women in the United States will have an abortion. Renee Bracey-Sherman is the person who said this, not me, that everybody loves somebody who has had an abortion. And I think a really important thing for us to do is have conversation around that, build empathy, build understanding that this is an issue that actually impacts every single person, because everybody loves somebody who has had an abortion.
Great last words. Thank you so much. Thank you to our panelists, and thank you to the audience today. You have heard a lot here, and I hope you are taking away something that inspires you to act, not just to listen, but to actually get in the arena and get dust on your faces. Please keep an eye out for future webinars hosted by the school, and visit som.yale.edu/alumni to see upcoming events. Take care of yourselves and take care of each other. Till soon.